Good afternoon, everybody, and I'm sorry for the recorded message. Unfortunately, English is not my first language, and given the time constraint of the short presentation, it's much easier for me to record it. Congratulations, because you are producing an exceptional fiber. South African wool has always been appreciated because of its regularity. It actually delivers a higher yield, lower waste during combing, and that's because the sorting at the farm level is carried out very, very well with extreme attention. And but on top of that, recently you have been leading the transition towards sustainable and traceable fiber. And of course, there is a growing demand for such kind of wool, as you all know and as you can all appreciate, which means that we are also experiencing a higher demand for South African wool. We don't have an organization in South Africa, but considering how the demand is evolving, we're really thinking how to enter your market in a more direct way. And should that happen soon, hopefully next year I'll be able to join your conference in person, which is always nice. So before being more specific and talking more in detail about the wool industry, I'd like to give you an overlook to what's happening to supply chains around the world. And companies are looking more and more to local manufacturers, to local suppliers, for two main reasons. The more short-term one is the logistic crisis. The cost of transportation has gone up to 10 times during the worst times of last year. And the transit time have also increased quite a lot, making it more complicated to buy from suppliers which are very far away from you. But the second more long-term reason, which is probably here to stay, is the desire now to reduce potential risk of trade disruptions. But let's talk about the logistics first. And let me tell you that 80% of the world's merchandise travel by sea. And regardless to the huge demand for this kind of industry, it has been rather unprofitable for the past 20 years, until 2017, where all of the major shipping companies merged into three large alliances, which now control over 80% of the total market. And they are trying to protect the profitability by slightly reducing the capacity. And of course, we all expected during COVID that demand would collapse. So every single industry tried to reduce the fixed costs. And of course, the shipping industry did that by dismantling the oldest ships and the one that were less efficient, less sustainable. And when the demand picked up right after the very first lockdown, and we've realized that even more we are dependent on transportation because of the rise of e-commerce, the change of consumer habits, which are very, very interested in technological products, which require a lot of transportation. To give you an idea, a single laptop requires over 2.5 tons of material to be shipped around the world. Well, there were simply no containers around the world, no shipping vessels. Now, of course, the industry is investing again. They are buying new vessels, but of course, the delivery for these new ships is within 12, 18 to 24 months. So we are going to be under logistic stress still for at least for this year and half of next year. And as a consequence, supply chains, which are heavily reliant on cheap labor and quick and affordable transportation, are under a lot of stress. And we have realized that we can no longer rely on a system where goods have to travel between different continents several times. To give you an idea on how dependent we are on transportation in our industry, I want to share you the supply chain of a pair of sneakers. I couldn't find anything more relevant to the wool industry, like a suit or or a piece of knitwear, because these charts are rather new and I couldn't find anything which had the same level of detail. But it gives you this gives you an idea of the complexity. And imagine that every brand, every retailer deals with many different projects, many different products, many different supply chains, and now they have to deal with a complexity which they can no longer cope with. Recently, the president of the Italian Fashion Industry Federation said, and I read his, and I'm quoting him, "We will have to think a lot about the supply chain. Probably the upstream supply chain will have to be brought closer to home, even if some areas of Europe are already congested. Never before has producing had so many problems. It was once said that the important thing was to sell, that there was always a way to produce. Now the situation has changed radically, and to sell, you must first understand how you will get to production. I find it also a stimulating and exciting situation. What lies ahead is to redesign the paradigm of a system and create something completely new." And I believe this is a very positive message to the European textile industry, who has been under stress for a couple of decades right now. This chart shows you in a very simple way, how supply chain will be redesigned. And we have discussed a lot about the dependence on transportation and the risk of potential lockdowns and border closing. Just to give you an idea, for instance, which is very specific to what we do, we have a mill in Mongolia producing cashmere. Mongolia represents 50% of the cashmere production. And it has only two countries that share the border with her. One is Russia and the other one is China. Of course, transportation through Russia is no longer possible. Transportation through China has been very complicated for the past year and a half because of lockdowns. Chinese are not letting import and export from Mongolia, and as a consequence, 50% of the world cashmere production is now blocked in Mongolia with no other way than air transportation in order to be brought closer to the market. The other potential risk, the other big risk which companies are now facing is the unpredictable trade disruption, which can be a consequence of government policies such as trade wars. And finally, there are other risks which are very relevant to our industry, which is the fashion industry, which is always under the spotlight, which are the risk of violation of human rights, which is very relevant to some countries, or of the lack of environmental policies in some other countries. And this has been, for instance, a big problem to the cotton industry, who buys a lot from the Xinjiang region. So we are basically transitioning from a just-in-time business where goods arrived and at the manufacturing plant just a few minutes before being processed. That's the famous Toyota model in Japan, to a just-in-case system where the supply is limited and manufacturers must plan their purchases ahead in order to make sure they have enough supplies. We are moving from a global production network to a local production network. We are moving away from minimized stocks, which has been a concern to most industry who wanted to keep the invested capital as low as possible, to the need of local warehousing and building up reserve strategies. We are moving away from a global to a global industrial footprint, to an approach where you build where you sell. And finally, we are giving more and more importance to risk management since 2020. And risk management was actually never a concern to the industry before COVID. And finally, I think another big push to the local textile industry will come from recycling. As you know, the governments are discussing about policies in order to promote recycling of garments. which is a major problem to landfills. And of course, this means building up collecting infrastructures, but also manufacturing infrastructures. And in some cases, this is already a reality. Prato, which is an Italian textile district, already recycles more than 10 million kilos of wool and recycles over 10% of the total production of cashmere in the world, 1 million kilos out of 10 million kilos. So it's now the time to talk more about the wool industry specific dynamics. And we are coming to, we have seen a big bounce back of demand since July 2021. Before then, stocks in Europe and in China were very large. And since then, the demand started moving up very, very quickly. This would be a record year for knitters in Europe especially, and our customers, the knitting spinners, they are offering deliveries in early 2023 now, which is very long for the fashion industry, which usually is very quick. And that's because, of course, there is a number of brands moving back to Europe for their production, brands that were completely irrelevant on Asian manufacturers, and now they want to diversify their supply chain. But also there is a fashion trend favoring a more relaxed and comfortable attire, which we are all very, very aware of. Regardless, even if woven products are not in fashion, 2021 has been a growing a year where there was a strong growth in demand, and this year as well the growth is still quite strong. We are not back to 2019 level, which were record, but this is a good year for weavers as well. This is because of restocking. The supply chain was empty. There were no woven products in the pipeline, but also because the event industry is having a very positive momentum. In the US only, this year they will celebrate over 2.6 million weddings, which translate in an expenditure of $65 billion. And there is an estimated consumption of 50 to 60 million meters of cloth just for the weddings in the US this year. There is the demand is moving to stretch fabrics where wool is processed together with nylon, and this allows opportunities also in women's wear and in the outdoor. Jersey manufacturing, circular knitting. I'm not sure if you are aware with the product. It's basically what you need to produce a polo t-shirt. That industry used to be only cotton and polyester driven, and now there is a new market for premium sportswear, premium next to skin garments, which is using wool, to the point that this industry has become the major customer for some of the largest spinners in the world. These products require long wool, not pure fleeces, but at least 75 to 80% fleeces, because the yarn is very fine and must be extremely regular. This type of yarn is then usually treated totally easy care for machine washing and tumble drying, because this product, of course, have to be washed quite frequently. Hand knitting, which has been very, very much in demand during COVID, because people were locked at home and they were dedicating a lot of time to their hobbies. Of course, now it's experiencing a natural decrease in demand. While we see a good demand in the carpet and upholstery production, especially in Europe, UK, and Southeast Asia, Nepal and India are very big importers of this kind of wool. That's because there is a swing toward natural fibers, finally. But also, unfortunately, the market in China is contracting for two main reasons. Number one is environmental policies requiring better scouring plants, which in some areas are not available. but also the housing. There is a real estate crisis in China, and this year, for instance, sales of new homes are down 40%, and new homes is where usually you put your new carpet. Shifting the attention to markets from products, I can tell you that Europe and Turkey are performing extremely well. Demand started improving since July last year, and I must say that from October onwards, we have been clearing up all of our stocks of finished goods over here. And that's thanks to strong demand coming from shops, especially in the United States, but also in most of Europe. I must say, I believe shops in Germany are struggling a bit more than in the rest of Europe for psychological reasons mainly. The German consumer is more concerned about the actual geopolitical crisis. Of course, we have concerns over the cost of electricity, which has quadrupled in the past year. And there is a major complication in finding new workers and in getting new machinery, because machinery producers are completely booked out until 2024. So spinners and weavers will have to increase their prices from July this year, but they expect this will not affect the demand in the short term, which will remain quite solid for the next 12 to 18 months. Obviously, the processing capacity in Europe is very limited. The majority of the capacity is still in China, and it will remain in China, which is by far the largest producer and consumer of wool. But Chinese are not enjoying such a positive momentum, and they are actually looking into expanding their huge internal market to make up for the orders they are losing from the international buyers. Of course, they've been struggling in the past year and a half because of logistics and now because of lockdowns. In the month of April, top makers in Zhangjiagang, in the Jiangsu area, which is the big wool district in Europe, had to close for lockdown, some only for a week, some other for 3 weeks. And this has reduced their production capacity. After restarting, though, they haven't managed to go to reach full capacity yet, and that's because internal demand is suffering. 30% of shops in China are now closed, and sales of apparel are down 25% compared to last year. For this reason, the processors in China are focusing on finer wool, and you've seen that the price of fine wool is growing very much, whereas the price of medium wool it's suffering. That's because Chinese are focusing on more profitable products since they have a lower production capacity at the present stage. We believe this will be short term. We believe the demand will pick up after the lockdown measure will be eased and people will be able to enjoy the big government stimulus that Chinese government is putting in order to mitigate the effect of the latest COVID lockdown. The rest of the world, well, the industry in the rest of the world is quite small. India is doing quite fine, the North Africa also. South America is enjoying very good orders from the United States, thanks to the fact that people are looking to a more local supply chain, but also because of the strong United States dollar, which is of course making imports cheaper at this stage. And finally, a little outlook over the production of Australia, which remains by far the biggest producer of wool, with 440 million kilos. So Australia expects that this year the production will increase 6.5% over last year, and roughly 30 million kilos up compared to the historical low of 284 in 2020. And that's because of the exceptional rainfall that happened this year. From July 2021 to March 2023, 2022, sorry, Australia has exported 235 million kilos of wool, 50% of which is below 19.5 micron. This means 22% more production, more exports compared to the previous year in terms of volumes, and 50% more in terms of price. I can tell you that the greasy wool market in South Africa has become more sophisticated in the past few years. And that's because many growers managed to differentiate their source of income, and now they can afford to withdraw their wool from auctions when they are not happy about the market. We've seen the offer shrinking when demand was not good, with a higher number of pass-lane lots. And this, I believe, is a positive news for our industry, because this gives stability to prices, therefore allowing us and our customers to plan our purchases longer in advance without being too much worried on potential shocks over prices. And finally, I have to tell you that some industry leaders in wool producing countries are concerned that this boom in knitwear will lead the demand towards more coarse wool. But we don't see that coming yet. We still find a very, very strong demand for fine wool as well. And if that was not the case, you would really see that in prices. And prices of medium wool in dollar base, they are the same as a year ago. And now let me spend you the last few minutes to talk to you a little bit more about our Autentico project. Autentico is not another certification. I don't believe the world needs another sustainability or animal welfare protocol. Autentico was born in 1999 with the intention to offer traceable products to the market in partnership with brokers, spinners, and weavers. And 20 years later, we have decided to restart our project because we felt the need to invest in the relationship with the grower. Of course, auctions will remain the most efficient way to buy wool and the most efficient way to sell wool. But if we would limit our activity to buying at auction and selling wool tops, we would be commodity trader, and this is not what we want to be. We believe that wool is a fantastic fiber, and there are many great stories behind it. And we want to build a community who shared stories, but also relevant information, and works together in finding solution to challenges. Autentico honors the fact that you are already doing a great job, that you already comply with many requirements in the domain of animal welfare, quality assurance, environmental care, and so on. So Autentico is simply the summary of the great work you are already doing. At the supply chain level, Autentico ensures transparency and traceability from supply chain to the consumer. Through the Autentico platform, growers and herders are connected to the rest of the supply chain, and we hope to bring part of the premium that brands are prepared to pay for traceable products back to the growers in order to give them an incentive to continue improving. You've done a lot of improvements in terms of animal welfare, and there is a lot of improvement required regarding the environmental credibility of wool in the future. We use existing standards which are already honored by the legislation and that are already applicable in your country. And these standards are related to best practices and sustainability aspect, and they are relevant to the animal welfare, the land and pasture management, the social responsibility, and of course the traceability of the fiber, which is very important to be sure that people are not playing around. We now have 1,000 of growers which are part of our project in Australia and New Zealand, and we are willing to expand it to South Africa and South America this year. And let me finish by telling you that in the past 3 years, we've tried to improve, to magnify the dialogue across the industry, organizing an online event, which is called Wool Connect, which brings together growers from Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, South and North America, together with industry leaders and other relevant stakeholders to promote a more sustainable wool industry. This year, we have decided to increase our focus to other animal fibers, including cashmere, mohair, and alpaca, and we've rebranded the event to Natural Fiber Connect. And I hope you will be able to attend our event in September, which is the occasion for us to celebrate our 100-year anniversary, which is happening this year. So I'm looking forward to see you at Wool Connect. I'm looking forward to see you in person, hopefully soon. And thank you very much for your attention.